Hey, I'm Steven Tocher, and this is my movie review for May 9th, 2011. The Great Dictator was written, directed, produced, and starred in by Charlie Chaplin. In 1940, Charlie Chaplin had pushed the envelope on what filmmaking was to become in the future, not only in the humorous side of film, however, but on the political and on a world spectrum level of what was going on during World War II. Taking the idea of neo-Nazism and making light of it in a very tasteful way must have been one of the most challenging things that anyone could have done, maybe in film history. Taking a character and then molding them into something that everyone could to somehow relate to, where someone who was so small in stature would be just so angry, but yet so comedic that we even had not a lightheartedness towards Hitler, but a kind of odd compassion or feeling sorry for a person who had, for the most part, been bullied his whole life. The idea came, I personally think, from The Prince and the Pauper that Disney had produced in around 1920, which was more or less a children's story of two people looking alike and changing positions in life. Now, we don't really see that right until the end, when Charlie Chaplin gives one of the most breathtaking and intimate speeches I've ever heard in my life at the end of the movie Great Dictator. But we don't see that transition of that switch until towards the end of the film. The beginning of the film starts off with a young Jewish man who has gone through World War I, served his country, and now comes back. He has a little bit of a mental illness, some trauma, and the movie's very comedic at that point. He finally does get out of the asylum, gets home, and realizes that his entire community, filled with Jewish people, has been overrun by the policemen of the quote-unquote Aryan race. Now, Charlie Chaplin did a great job of masking the country and the names of people by using humor to get over that hump and changing the names just enough to not cause a huge uproar within the political community, but still getting his point across crystally clear, especially now 70 years after the film came out. As a person witnessing it, I can totally see the repercussions of history. Charlie Chaplin's mind was so in tune with the world that he was predicting in many ways the things that were to happen in the near future as World War II would ensue and end in 1945. There is such a deep respect for human life, even in the comedy that's going on. As the film progresses, the two end up switching. Hitler and the barber who goes back to his Jewish home. And when this happens towards the end of the film, there is such a relief as to the feeling that the war might end early and that America may not have to step into the war. And I think that's what Charlie Chaplin was getting at, to respect humans and the other people around us. And that there is a strength that can come from the most terrible and most garbage situation. But as history would tell, 55 million people would lose their lives in World War II, and we would see a turning of events which would lead to, the baby boom and in many ways the second push of the Industrial Revolution. And again, Charlie Chaplin was at the forefront of that. And I really do recommend this film. Maybe if you're not into slapstick comedy, you may not enjoy it as much. Or maybe if you're not a really visual or image-based person. But if it's just strictly for him babbling on in fake German, or seeing a mini love story happen, or some of the trauma that comes from these comedic actors, and the greatest piece of all, maybe one of the nicest and most crisp visuals I've ever seen, where Charlie Chaplin gives Hitler's type speech, but from the Jewish man perspective, and to love one another. If those are just the simple cases to watch this film, then go out there, take the 2 hours, sit down with some of your loved ones, as this film is totally tasteful. I would rate it G, especially the way things are today. And watch a film that was on the brink of changing the world like the world was being changed by war. I'm Steven Tocher. This is my review of The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin from 1940. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.